researching about Jacob this week, I came across this story. It was of a Missouri minister who was thinking she was on her way to do a good deed. They were going to a habitat house to be restored, and they were going to fix the front lawn because it looked like a construction site and plant all sorts of wonderful, growing, beautiful flowers to make the place a welcoming place. And when she got there with her group of people, and they're on the porch, it starts pouring rain. And so they're stuck on the porch, waiting for the rain to end so they can plant, when one of the people who volunteered to ask turned to her and said, "Have you encountered Jesus? Have you been saved?" I mean, this is a pastor, you know. And she's thinking, did you see the cross? I've been preaching on Sunday mornings for a number of years now. But she didn't say that. She gave the explanation that we give who grew up in the church. I've been saved. I've had that sense of God's presence in my life my whole life. I was baptized as a child. I was raised in the church. And God has gradually unfolded his will and desire for my life. That wasn't the answer he was looking for, right? He was looking for some great moment, that time when you could point and say, this is when I saw God. This is when my life changed dramatically. This is the moment, the day, and the time when I gave my heart to Jesus. And she didn't have those words to say. She was probably a lot like us. Grew up in the church. And just gradually filled ourselves with this sense of who God was calling us to be. And she says, you know, I didn't think any ill toward him because he's a wonderful man, a pacifist. He gives to the community. And he is so sure of Jesus having touched his life. I think sometimes we need that kind of experience, but we're not willing to go there yet. For Jacob, his experience is coming at a tough place in his life. Jacob has not been the most trustworthy of young men. In other words, when he was young, he got his name because he was holding on to his brother's foot, because he's a twin, as he was coming out of his mom. And they called him Jacob because he grasped the heel. But Jacob also meant trickster. And Jacob, one day, when they were much older, had made this wonderful stew. It must have smelled delicious. And his brother, who'd been out hunting all day and had no luck, smelled the stew when he came in. And Jacob said, "You can have a bowl if I can have your inheritance." So Esau gave away his inheritance for this bowl of stew. I hope it was a really good stew. And then Jacob, to make sure this actually came into being, with his mother's help, tricked his dad into pronouncing him the heir. At that moment, Jacob did feel a little guilty, so he did run away. He ran and escaped what he had done on his own to get the things that he wanted. And his life then sort of got turned on its head, because as he escaped, he ran into his uncle and fell in love with the most beautiful woman on earth, only to find out that her father, his relative, tricks him into marrying the older sister. And says, well, you can actually have the other one if you work for me for another 10 years. And so then he finally gets to marry the one he wanted to marry. But now he's at the point in his life when he wants to change things. He wants to go back home and make up with he sends ahead of him gifts with a message from Jacob. So he sends first some sheep and some cattle and some horses and some goats, all with a message from Jacob. And so this night, they are almost there. It's going to be his turn now, not just the presents. He's going to have to come face to face with the brother that he has stolen his inheritance. And so, that night, he sends his wife and children across the river, so they're already there waiting to meet Esau. But he's not quite ready. So he goes back across the river, lies down, and starts wrestling with a stranger. Now when I get to this point, I don't know about you, but I remember one of the Olympics, because I'm not much of a wrestling fan. And so I was watching the Olympics because I was living in Wyoming, and one of the wrestlers for the U.S. was from Wyoming, and I thought, well, I should know about this. And so I turned it on to see his big match where he was going to win the medal. And there is Rue Gardner and this other guy, and they're like this. Seriously, for however many minutes it took, they were just hugging each other. They just stood up and hugged each other, and then the bell dinged, and one of them won, and I still have no idea why. Well, Jacob has that. Him and this stranger are equally matched, and they are there all night wrestling, holding on to each other. The stranger had grabbed him, and they are holding tight. And dawn is fast approaching. The time when Jacob is going to have to do the thing he doesn't want to do. And at that moment, as the dawn is coming, the stranger cheats. He hurts him in his hip so that he has to release him. But as Jacob is letting go, he makes him promise to give him a blessing. But before the stranger will do that, he asks him, "What's your name?" And this is where the truth comes, the hard part of encountering God. Jacob says, "My name is Jacob." A confession. I'm a trickster, I'm a liar. I'm someone who grabs for the stuff that isn't mine. And the stranger says, "Your name is Israel, for you have striven with God. You have challenged God. You have confronted God. So your name now, Israel, means one who has struggled with God." And then, because even though he's hurt, Jacob had grabbed hold of that stranger, he blessed him. The blessing that God had promised before of children, of land, of promise. Jacob's story that night is a story of encountering God and coming out different. He comes out dramatically changed. He goes in a healthy man who can wrestle all night, and in the morning is a man who walks with a limp because he's encountered God and can't help but be changed. So I wonder sometimes if when we tell our stories of faith, our subtle growing into our relationship with God, that we miss the need for that big encounter. That night we have wrestled with who God truly wants us to be. That night that is going to change us completely. Make us go in a place we don't want to go. Confront people that we don't really want to deal with because it's going to hurt. Maybe we as the church need to take that time to allow God to change us. Have we gathered as a group and prayed for God to change the people who are coming here together? Have we gathered together or separately and spent the night asking God how it is He wants us to change? What our name will be now? Who we are going to become because we've encountered this living God who can't help but change us. For Jacob, that was a dramatic night. And it changed the course of his family and the course of Israel. For Jacob is the one who has the 12 tribes, the 12 sons. The one who fathers the child that will save Israel in the hardest time of their life when there's no food. But he was able to do that because of an encounter with God that transformed him from someone who was used to getting his own way any way he could into a person who knew he had to confront his past, who had to take that moment, encounter that brother that he had hurt deeply, and ask for forgiveness for what he had done. And because of that, the encounter with God and the encounter with his brother, he was changed forever. And that's what God is asking, not just us personally, but us as the church to take that time to wrestle with who we are meant to be, who we are called to be in this place, here in Elkhorn, who we're to bring the presence and the light of God to go to those places that we don't normally want to go to speak to people that we aren't sure we want to talk to share that question that minister didn't want to have to answer about where we were sitting. I'm learning to share who we are because of our encounter with God. Because God has something He wants us to do. God is inviting us to be changed so that we can transform the world. I mean, think about the story from Matthew. Jesus is there with a crowd full of people, a group of strangers who are hungry. And by breaking that bread and giving them that fish, He takes that desperate group of people and creates a community. He creates the opportunity for abundance in what looks like. He creates a meal where people now laugh and share and welcome each other instead of being worried about where the next fight will come. That's what God's calling us to do. To be the church that offers that abundance. To be the church that says, I've struggled with God, and God has sent me out to encounter those who I've harmed. God has sent me out to invite in those who haven't been welcome somewhere else. God has sent me out to love the stranger, to love my So my challenge for us